can see, this is really a terrible time. And how can a group of helpless, ordinary women bring peace to such a bad situation? Let's first introduce our major groups. This Women of Liberian Mass Action for Peace is the major group responsible for bringing peace for Liberia. Well, they're not responsible, but they took the responsibility and they succeeded. Please go to the next one. This group is special because this is the first time that Muslims and Christians in Liberia came together to work toward the same goal. And that was kind of the basic stone for the success of the whole event. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a map of the groups involved. On top, we have Charles Taylor, the dictator, who has an anti-terrorist unit, which just suppresses the rebels. The rebels are Lure, Model, funny names. And this is the group, the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace. And we have 4 leaders. Today we're going to be examining enneagrams for Laban Bowie and Asatu Kenneth, the women of the first and the fourth picture. Next one, please. Well, before I hand over to Dustin to talk about movement, I'll first brief introduce to these 2 leaders we're going to be talking about. Laban Bowie, please go ahead. She's basically the hero in this movie. She's the mother of 4 children, trained as a social worker, expert at trauma healing and reconciliation. Yeah, this is quoted from her. Asatu Kenneth, she's the chief deputy of the Liberia Police Department. He was invited to Big and Christian Women's Initiative. She's a Muslim. She founded then the Liberian Muslim Women's Organization, and she, together with Bowie, brought people together. Yeah. So now let's welcome Dustin to talk about the movement in detail.
So this movement started, I'm Dustin Klein, talking about the movement. Thank you, Ulysses. This movement started when Laban Bowie, who was a sort of social worker previous to the founding of this movement, had a dream about just basically God was telling her to get the women of the church together, because she was the president of her church group, and pray for peace. And she went and gave this great speech about it and created the Women in Peace Building Network called WIGNET. And then someone who was there, Asatu Kenneth, was actually Muslim, and she decided that this was a great thing to sort of like do. And she went to her mosques and talked to the imams and organized the women from all the mosques, so it became a like multi-religion association. So they had a wide range of influences for things that happened up, from Martin Luther King to the Bible and ancient Greek plays. Basically, they put a lot of planning into it. It wasn't quite as spontaneous as one might think. They distilled their message down to one ideal, which was peace, and their statement of intent was, in the past we were silent, but after being killed, raped, dehumanized, and infected with diseases, and watching our children and our families destroyed, war has taught us that the future lies in saying no to violence and yes to peace. We will not relent until peace prevails. So they also decided that they would all wear white clothes, and sort of one of the big things for Liberian women is they love to do their hair up in like fanciful ways to make their identity known. And they decided they would only wear white, and they would tie their hair up in these white buns to make them all like a cohesive unit, and then they would only use the mothers. So when they staged these protests, they picked a location that was easy to get to. Charles Taylor would see them twice a day, and other common people would get there and be able to see. So they picked a fish market that was en route from Charles Taylor's house to the Capitol building. And they created a song that was easy to learn and catchy, so that they would sing it and get their message across. And they actually had a sex strike where they decided they wanted have sex with their husbands until they have peace. So they were granted an audience with Taylor after several months of effort, where Lim issued this statement. But the next step was to convince the members of LIRD that they should also attend the peace talks. They actually sent Asatu Kenneth, who went to school with one of the leaders, and they met in Sierra Leone, and she convinced them to go. So at the peace talks, around 40 women went to Ghana to sort of like observe, and during them, Taylor was indicted for war crimes, but he fled back to Monrovia during the middle of them, and he left his sort of like delegates to finish the peace talks. But they were there for several weeks and nothing was being achieved, so they staged a sit-in where they linked arms outside the building they were in, and forced all the delegates to sit there and work it out. And finally, after like a couple days of being locked in there, they agreed to sign the peace talks. So basically the terms were that they would create a transitional government after Taylor's government had been taken away, and they would institute a ceasefire. The president of the interim government was Charles Moody Bryant, and the ECOWAS and the UN would keep peace. They'd also have a disarmament, and there'd be a government and economic management assistance program to help the people going through it. So back to Ulysses.
Okay, so in this case, I think the enneagrams of them are sort of clear, obvious, based on what they did. What's more interesting is how the two leaders of different enneagrams interact with each other. First, Madame Chloe, she has a strong thoughts, well planned, exemplary, inspiring, sparkling excellence. She's basically type 1. Asatu Kenneth, she's the connector, which is a term for type 9. She's most extraordinary in bringing together the Muslim and Christian women and arranging the peace talk. She's the actual one who arranged the peace talk between the women, the Charles Taylor, and the rebel groups. So as we can see here, this is really a dynamic map. Under stress, Levan Bowie into like the artist. She emphasizes with people. She knows the emotions. She wants to help people. And Asatu is the guardian. Is the type 6. She served as an inner source, and she warned the women were closing. Like some important people are coming. See, together they two really form a strong leading group that no single one can do. Yeah, and let's now welcome Willie to talk about after effects and the conclusion of it, please.
Thank you, Ulysses. So yeah, like you said, I'm going to be talking about the aftermath effects of the movement. There were elections that were held right after. The first election was inconclusive because there wasn't a majority that was found. The second election, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was elected. She had a 52% majority, and she was the first president of Africa, or the first female president to ever hold office in Africa. Next, afterwards, there were a few protests that were similar to the movement in Monrovia, Liberia. The Women, Peace, and Security Network Africa, WIPSN, was established, and that was just a women supporting group that went around to different countries in Africa, helping and supporting peace and women's leadership. Then there was the Second Ivorian Civil War, and that was in the Ivory Coast. That dealt with, there were 40,000 women protesters who showed up, all wearing white, and it was just another similar protest. 1,000 Women March happened in Nigeria, and that was just a similar experience of nonviolent protests. All right, to summarize, we talked about the history, the context of the movement. There was terrible war and violent crimes being done to the people, and the women of Monrovia felt that it was their duty to stand up non-violently, but fight for their husbands and their children. Lima, as we talked about, was an excellent leader. We saw that she was strong. The most important traits that we found were that she was passionate and that she had great planning. Passion-wise, she was a mom, she was a wife, and she really used those to involve others and to inspire others to do the same. And for good planning, she organized these movements very well. Like Dustin Ulysses said, she organized the barricade at the peace talks and made sure that everyone wore white to support the cause. Next slide. So in conclusion, like I just said in the last slide, we believe that passion and proper planning are necessary for a leader to be successful. And this concludes our presentation, and we'd like to open it up to questions.
Surely there are some questions.